This is Taranis AcreForward, the ag industry's most thought-provoking podcast. Listen to interesting people as we go in-depth into the issues affecting crop advisors, growers, and farm communities, uncovering the truth about the ag business and using technology to prepare for the unforeseeable. Ready to explore the future? Let's dig in.
Just hang on tight. I'm going to introduce our next guest. It's Don Lamb. Don Lamb is the director of the Indiana State Department of Agriculture. Don, welcome to our show today. I'd like to introduce you to our listeners and have a discussion with you about what's happening in ag in Indiana. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So you're the director of the Indiana State Department of Agriculture. Can you share with us a little bit? What is that? What does that mean? A lot of states have what secretaries of ag. Is that a similar role, or share with us what's your remit? What's it similar to in other states, and what are you focused on?
Right. Well, the Indiana State Department of Agriculture is a little bit different than most other states, mostly because we don't have a lot of regulatory part of our job here in Indiana. A lot of that goes with the state chemist office housed out of Purdue. We've got a great relationship with them. They do a great job. But a lot of those things in most states might happen out of the State Department of Agriculture. What we do here ends up being a lot of advocacy. We do have a little bit of regulatory function in our grain buyers and warehouse licensing agency, which really is a protection agency for farmers, is what it is. And as far as just knowing that their grain is safe financially in a grain a buyer or warehouse situation. And but other than that, we've got the FFA, and everybody knows about the FFA and what great work it does and the way it teaches young people. We've got an economic development arm, which we can talk about quite a bit today, and how we really want to promote economic development through the agricultural space in Indiana. And then we've got a soil and water conservation division, which we have about 35 people across our state working on clean water and conserving soil. And then we've got a policy team that keeps an eye on what's happening at the State House. So there's a lot of good things going on here. And a lot of it is really, like I say, just being a good advocate and a cheerleader for agriculture.
That's amazing. So I heard you've got advocacy, you have economic development, stewardship of our resources and where we go, and then policy that can help Hoosiers and Indiana farmers do what's right and do what's best. So that's a big role. There's a lot there. As we get to know each other here, tell us a little bit about your background. So who is Don Lamb, and how did you arrive at this point where you have this responsibility as the director here in Indiana?
Well, I appreciate you asking me that question, and I know you know the answer.
I do.
Mike and I, we do go back a little ways. We actually probably go back to very early on when you were in Indiana, and kind of the story of Taranis is kind of near and dear to my heart, honestly. But I'm a farmer from Lebanon, and I've really been in this role as the director of agriculture since March 13th. So I still, yes, I'm new. I definitely have crossed over the timeline where I can't use that as an excuse anymore. Right. And I'm really anxious now, and I feel like we're starting to get some traction, and I'm starting to know what to do day by day. But I really am a farmer, grain farmer. My dad was a first generation farmer, and I farmed with my brother and his boys. And I've got a daughter that's now working on the farm. And like I say, grain farm. Try to stick with some specialty crops there in Boone County. We've got some great markets for waxy corn, popcorn, seed soybeans, things like that. So we do quite a bit on the specialty market side. And I still would consider myself a farmer, but this is a full-time job, and I'm 100% committed here, and I try to keep my foot in the farm where I can, and I still live right there at the farm. So it's a blessing to only be 40 minutes away from my work, and so that's kind of where I'm at. I've got a wife and 4 daughters, and so two girls that are married, one getting married, and one just graduated college. So I'm getting up towards that empty nesting stage of life.
I don't understand that. I'm on the other end of it with 5 years and a son, and just starting into the college journey. But I do have 5 teenage daughters, all at the same time now. So We share some of those things in common. I do know that so you've been farming a long time. You have a lot of connections with Boone County, Purdue, and you also have a nonprofit AgriStorage that you've done since about 2012. What is the goal of that nonprofit, if you don't mind?
Yeah, the nonprofit is, like I said, it's called AgriStewards, and it really was just something that God started. I don't think we had a strategy to get it started. But he did, and it's just been a blessing to watch it grow. And the idea of that is really to teach subsistence farmers across the world how to take better care of their soil. And we teach a curriculum called Farming God's Way, which really just teaches a lot of the basics of soil care, just from a different perspective. We're not trying to trying to westernize or trying to mechanize agriculture, but if you're teaching a person that's farming a half an acre to an acre that is their primary food source, it's really important to them. And if you can, in a lot of cases, maybe double their production just by some simple agronomic techniques you can teach them, it's really valuable. So it's been great to watch that happen. AgriStewards has been in about 30 different countries now, and just kind of all over. And Brian Smith is the leader of that for us, and he spends about 60-70% of his time doing AgriStewards work, and then the rest he spends on our farm.
That's an amazing effort, and it's a privilege that you get to see farming and agriculture and the way people handle that in different markets around the world. So when you look at Indiana and you think about your role and you think about your global perspective, what is there something that stands out to you with all the time you've had looking at things around the world when you look at agriculture in Indiana?
Yeah, well, it is interesting, and I don't say this just because I'm talking to a Taranis guy, but I went to Uganda in February and helped with some of this as far as teaching farmers to farm with a hoe, and help them do that better. And I get back that next week, and we're talking to your Taranis representatives, and we're thinking about using drones on our farm to identify weeds and tell us what our stand count is in our corn and soybean fields. And you just think about that perspective is it just kind of blows me away, to be honest, that what we do is as simple as using a hoe and putting a seed in the ground with the right inputs. And that's worldwide. That's what it is. That's what it's about. But then when we see technology come together, like what Taranis offers, and you can see that taken out over large acres and still done, with a lot of good intensity, then that's really where the technology pays off. And in so many ways, we're doing exactly the same thing with a hoe, with specifics in planting that crop, as what we're able to do with a 24-row corn planter and a drone to help monitor how that plant is doing. So the perspective is incredible right now across the world and what's happening.
It's amazing how quickly these things change. So yeah, we do know each other. So Taranis has been around since 2016, but there's a lot of technologies that get developed over time. And so, the artificial intelligence, which is probably a loaded word these days, was developed to just understand what was in the imagery. They build these databases, but, I think we formally met in 2020 is when I joined the company. And that was still a time, it wasn't until 2021 that the off-the-shelf optics, drones, energy, battery power, the ability to acquire this and leverage the AI and do things at scale. So for people listening who don't know what this is, you've seen drones before, we're talking about using a hoe or simple technology. A lot of technologies, the constellation of them come together at a point in time where you can actually make it economically feasible to have game tape on your acre to really, I try to keep things simple. You can ring doorbell your farm or FaceTime your fields. And really up until now, we couldn't know this is what the planter thought it did. This is what we see in the combine. And in the middle, we're all trying to figure out, how many fields did you reckon you farmed, Don? Across all those fields, what happened, what worked well, what didn't? And so we're very fortunate to live at a time where we can record, see, document in almost an instant what's happening. But in 3 years, it's changed that much. So how important are these innovations to you as a farmer, but also when you think about Indiana agriculture? What comes to mind? What should we be doing and thinking about as we support these kinds of things?
Well, I think it's very, very important, and part of that story for us is we've been using Taranis technology for this is our third year, and I would say we've been learning right along with you.
Yes.
And part of it is the fact that if we're going to use technology, we have to pay attention to it. You have to have some discipline to follow it, and then to actually do something with that information. So it's new. It's a new, even though we're not doing the flying, you guys are doing the flying for us. We have to change our management style to make use of that technology. And that's, you think, well, that'd be simple. Well, it's not really that simple. When you've never done that before, you've never used that as part of your management technique, you have to get used to it too. So, this is our third year, but this is the year I'm most excited about it because it'll be better than last year. And part of that's because you guys are getting better, and part of that's because we're getting better. And so it's something where we are interested enough that we're investing in it, not just with money, but with our time, knowing that it's not perfect yet. If we all waited till everything was perfect, we'd never get anywhere. So, this is definitely one of those areas where you're all kind of part of a team working together and seeing how we can do this. And right now, today is the perfect day. I'm excited. I would guess that tomorrow morning we'll see our first pictures from Taranis of some of our first planted corn. And it's been in the ground way too long because it's been cold. And we've been very nervous about this corn, and it's either up now or it's not coming up. And we can look at that field and walk it, and we can see good spots and bad spots. But your drones are going to tell me exactly how many seeds per acre there are in every spot of that field. And so, that's just great information. And we're excited to see that tomorrow morning.
Well, it's amazing. I think you said something. So a lot of the people that listen to this and that we work with serve in retail functions or ag advisory roles. It's probably not a role that a lot of people are talking to around the country. It's a small segment of the population that's even in agriculture that's serving in those advisory roles. But you think about what this data can do. Mm-hmm. It's amazing that you can get a stand count across a farm and make different decisions. It changes how you farm. I think that's something you said. And I remember when we had this conversation a couple of years ago. Well, if I see this, then I'd have to change maybe this, and this. Why do you think it's so hard? Because you said perfect. Nothing is really perfect in agriculture. So why do you think it's so hard for us to take changes in agriculture? What are the good reasons for that? And what are some of the reasons that maybe we should think about if you think about it as a farmer or any role?
Right.
Why are we slow to make some changes when we look at technology and the things we use on the farm?
Yeah. I think part of the reason when I think about grain farming the way we do it, it's this biological process, agronomic process that's happening, and there's a thousand different things that can happen to that plant to affect what happens. And so much of the time it's just weather. If things don't work out right, we know why. Well, the weather wasn't quite right. And so I think part of the reason that we're slow to change is we've tried a lot of different things, and it's really hard now to find one thing that makes this big difference that you can say, oh, this was definitely worth it. This year, this was really worth it. We could really see the difference. And my dad always talked about farming being part art and part science.
Okay.
And, the science part you can see and you can put together. But the art part is the part where you know that even if something didn't make a big difference this year, that it's still the right thing to do. That this is going to make a difference over time. So it's hard to make those changes because it's not something you can point at and say, right here, this definitely is going to make a big difference. That's a little different when you start talking about some of the other work we're doing across the world. A lot of those places are in stages where, yes, there's some things that make a huge difference. If you try to replant a hybrid corn because you think it's going to grow the next year, you're not going to get much. And you'd be surprised how many places around the world will replant a hybrid corn that was given to them to grow. And so they need to be using open pollinated corn. So if they're going to save that seed and replant it, that's where a lot of the world is still at. And yet here we are trying to make minuscule changes to go from 230 bushels to acre to 233, so it's just a different mindset.
Well, I think there's a lot of wisdom that's handed down that sometimes we don't always document. And then there's what the heart knows or what we know, but we haven't been able to put into words or language. And being careful when you have the kind of risks that you have in farming is the right thing to do. So I think being able to afford to see and understand the little changes and how they can impact 3, 4, 5 bushel, 10 bushel. But mistakes cost you a lot more than that, than the incremental gains, right? And I think as people, we're trained to see what's wrong. So I know this, right? We have millions of acres that come in, they're digitized. And what does our system do? It counts things, but it also finds the weeds, it finds the disease, but it finds what's wrong. But I think the inverse is maybe sometimes more valuable, is what did you do right? What was working, right? So I think we, as human beings, sometimes we have trouble focusing on what went right. And that's probably even true in farming, I'd say, Don.
Oh yeah. No, I think you're exactly right in that we definitely get focused on what's wrong, and we're fixers. Farmers want to fix something. So if things look great, we're proud of it, but we turn our back and move on. Oh, that looks good. Let's go fix something. And so that's just kind of the way the nature of a farmer is, I think.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what is going right on your farm as we get these missions knocked down and we track it through the year. And I'm sure we'll be able to talk about that. Again, it's May 11th. So we're a bit early for a lot of these discussions. We're getting ready to get ready, but fixing to grow a lot of corn, a lot of beans. What else are you getting ready for? So you mentioned something on economic development in your role, and I know that's a passion of yours in some of your previous roles, Boone County, also some of the work you've done with Purdue. What do you think about, Don, with economic development, your role, Indiana, and where all this comes together in agriculture?
Yeah. Well, agriculture needs to start talking the talk of economic development better than we have in the past. And it's not that we've done such a poor job. It's just that in general, people work in the agriculture community, whether you're a farmer or maybe you're a supplier, we kind of keep our head down and keep working. And the agriculture community really provides so much economic opportunity to their communities with very little fanfare. And so and nobody's looking for fanfare, but we have to realize what our value is. And when you start thinking about the value of agriculture in Indiana, good friends with Mitch Frazier and all the work they're doing at Agronovis, and he will talk about the ag bioscience industry being a $58 billion industry. And then you think, well, production agriculture is some portion of that, $32 billion maybe. And then, but wait a minute, does that include hardwood production in Indiana? And the hardwood industry is a $10.5 billion industry.
It's amazing.
And if you take it up, it's amazing. If you take that up through, making cabinetry, if you just harvest hardwood, you're talking about $1.2 billion. The craft brew industry now in Indiana is a $1.2 billion industry, export a lot of that. And so it's a really big part of our economy here in Indiana. And we don't, as most people in agriculture, don't recognize that. And therefore, sometimes we're not as much a part of the conversation as we should be when it comes to overall economic development in our state and what's happening. And we want to get better at telling our economic development story as agriculture, so that as a team, we're part of the picture of agriculture of overall economic development in a state. And agriculture is considered when you're thinking about bringing in some other part of what you might think of as traditional development. Well, maybe agriculture is already in that space, maybe producing more revenue for a local economy than what this new industry might. And so we just need to be ready to tell that story, not as a defensive tactic against things that are going on. We all need to be positive on economic development, but as part of the team working towards overall economic development.
Well, we have an amazing, and that's what I was going to point out. I mean, some of these facts, for our listeners, if they want to look up the Indiana Economic Development Corp, so it's iedc.in.gov. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that, but some of the facts you mentioned. So I see here 11.2 billion in products sold, 10th in the U.S., 10,000 agribusiness companies. Some of this may be dated, but you said you're number one in wood office furniture. Here at Taranis, we actually worked with a Kimball out of Jasper, Indiana, and all of our furniture comes from Indiana. And I didn't know, moving back here, that Indiana had that capability. And then commercial duck, Spearmint, number 3. Just amazing the stuff that actually happens in Indiana.
Right.
Why is Indiana special for ag? Like, why are we number one in some of these things? Why is it a good place to have business, particularly in ag and bioscience?
Yeah. Well, there's a whole lot of just good reasons for us just where we're at in the world. We've got good soil and we've got good climate for raising crops, and we're at the crossroads of America. So transportation is good. And so there's a lot of those reasons. And then really I go back and a lot of good things started in those early 2005s, and I think about Mitch Daniels starting the Department of Agriculture in 2005, and he made agriculture a priority. On a statewide level, he said, we want agriculture to be a priority. And it created a lot of pride in what you do. And it kind of, you started talking about what place agriculture has in our economy. And so I think that mindset started then, and it goes right up through things like, again, what Mitch Fraser and Agronovus is doing in ag biosciences. We've got so many great companies. You think about a Corteva being in Indiana, and you think about Elanco and
Yep.
so many good agriculture, strong agricultural companies. And so it's as much a mindset as anything. And then it's this wheel that's rolling. Once you get that wheel rolling, Taranis comes to Indiana too, because you recognize this as a good place to be and a friendly environment for your business. And you came, and because you came, then there's more that ripples after that. And there's a ripple effect of what you're doing. Hopefully our farm makes a little bit more money because of what you do. And if we make a little bit more money, we pour that into our local community, and hopefully our local towns, even if they're a rural town, rural community, has a little better, living because of what's happening, because of what Taranis is doing. And it's just a ripple effect. And that's why Indiana's special, is because we really kind of created that kind of a feeling.
Yeah, I tend to agree, especially when the resources are great. The proximity to much of the nation's population makes it very helpful as well, because you think about the outputs and so there's a lot of things going right for Indiana. But I will tell you, the economic situation here, being in business, finding good talent across multiple disciplines, and being able to affordably build a business and create that value with partners, I think Indiana is a special place, and there's not many that can compete along those ag and biotech sectors, right? And
Right.
I think Purdue's a big part of that story, but we have other great universities here as well that are bringing technologies and people to bear in addition to the industry. So it's a really great place. So when you think about what you're doing now, what are the top economic development initiatives or ideas or concepts that you're working with now, Don?
Yeah. Well, you want to be involved in all the big ideas. That's one thing we have to keep ourselves engaged in the big opportunities that we know are coming, if it has to do with agriculture specifically. And then here in our at ISDA, we've got programs like Indiana Grown, which is a program where people that, if you think mostly farmer market type opportunities to sell their products. If it's an Indiana grown product, they can be an Indiana grown member, and we try to promote those products. So it's a space where somebody that might be doing something, it might be on a small scale, it could be on a really big scale, but they're doing it here in Indiana and selling their products direct to market. And, that's a big part of economic development. When you think about us sharing office space with the Office of Community and Rural Affairs, which deals a lot with small towns. And I think about, in my county of Boone County, I think about a Thorntown that's important to our community. It's a smaller town. And what does that community need? And how can agriculture help provide something for that community? If there's a farmer's market there, a lot of times we grain farmers, we commercial farmers, we may not think too much about going in and supporting the local farmers market, but that's part of why your community is attractive to people. So if we want to attract workforce, and a good workforce for our ag businesses, part of that is the fact we've got a small town that's really attractive that people would consider living near because it's got these amenities that they appreciate. And we have to recognize that it's all a teamwork that goes together. So agriculture needs to be focused not only on what's happening on their production, but what's happening in their communities and their towns.
Yeah, I think we think about that a lot because while we're in agriculture, we use technology. We're changing the kinds of jobs that you can have in rural America. It's a very small percentage of the population that lives in a rural area that supports farming, that has ag knowledge. But as this technology is coming in, it's creating new jobs for people who want to pilot and operate drones, repair equipment, do robotics. So I think the world's changing, but I think it's really important that as an ag community, just what you said, that we think about the impact of our businesses and how they come together to create environments that do create economic prosperity.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, how's Indiana doing on that front so far? When you look around the landscape, where are we doing this right? And where are some areas where you think we need to look a little differently and make some progress?
Right. Well, yeah, it's easy and get going on a podcast like this to start patting ourselves on the back and saying how great everything is. And it's all just working fine. And the bottom line is this mentality that we have is relatively new, I would say. Okay. The idea that it all fits together as part of one big picture is not something we've been talking about for a long time in the agricultural world. And so that part, I think which is actually kind of exciting, because I feel like we're just starting to scratch the surface on where we might go. And but workforce development is probably one of the areas where I would say we're probably struggling with that. And I've seen I've seen your company, and I've seen some of your training and your pilots, and that's a whole different group of people that you brought into the agricultural world. That it's exciting to see that happen. Where it's not just my local community guys working in the ag field. It's somebody has come in from somewhere else to take that job, and then again, we need to be better at making sure that they've got a good place to live and to work, and they've got an environment that's enjoyable to be in, and where they want to come back to. So workforce development is a challenge. And in agriculture, we're kind of going the opposite direction in a lot of ways. We're using robotics to milk cows now because we can do it with less people. Well, okay. So that's good. That's great that we're doing it with less people. You're scouting fields for us so we can do it with less people. It'd take us 50 people to do what you can do in an afternoon with a drone. And but that's going the opposite direction of what an economic development corporation in Indiana wants. We want to be attracting more people for these jobs. So the focus has to become different. They're high-tech jobs. They're high-paying, high-tech jobs, and that's where we've got to focus on getting better. But attracting more people is a challenge.
No, I agree. I think sometimes people look at technology as replacing folks, and in some cases it does, but it changes jobs. I think my window's open, you see guys coming by, those are cases of drones, and these are different people who don't come from farming, but they're very adept at engineering or pilot or aeronautics or different fields. And so they're coming in, and now we have new jobs. We have new businesses. There are businesses like third parties. They do 3PL type work of moving drones, servicing drones, software, artificial intelligence. So the world is really, really changing. But what's funny about this is I think it's moving tech jobs into rural America, where jobs were kind of hard to come by, and labor's been harder and harder to come by. So I think there's some positive trends, but we have to make the right decisions to fully maximize it.
Yeah, totally agree with everything you said. That's an area that I would say for your listeners, when you look at your communities, look where you live, and think about why people would want to live and work in your community, and then work towards making it a little bit better.
And you can only do that within your remit, right? So if you're operating at a retail location and you're hiring, you need to make decisions that have like technology like ours and others that make it a good place to work and invest in your people so you can grow and your farmers can grow. If you're a farmer, you got to be a good neighbor, right? And think about what you're doing and in that way. But it's pretty complicated. So you've had experience doing that in Boone County, right? So what are some of the things that you and the groups that you worked with did in Boone County to achieve some of these goals and make it a better place, to attract business, to make it a better place to live?
Right. Well, one thing, I think you always have to think about giving back, and there's one place in our community that gives back a lot is called Love Inc., Love in the Name of Christ. And the farming community came together several years ago and started growing a field of soybeans where the farm community would come together and plant it and take care of all the expenses of raising that crop, and then get 10 or 12 combines together in the fall and harvest it and have a lunch together and just kind of have a fun day early in the fall. And then all the proceeds would go to Love Inc., who was helping people find places to live and taking care of people who really were just having a tough time in life. And so that's one example where there's always going to be a need for to help people. And there's usually an organization in every county, every community that's trying to do that. And agriculture can pick up the pieces in something like that and really help. And again, those are the things that sometimes in agriculture, we may not think of that. We may not think about being involved as a group and there are plenty of farmers and agriculture people always, definitely good at giving, but sometimes it's good when you come together as a community, as an agriculture community, and do something, as much as anything, it's for the fellowship and to remind ourselves how fortunate we are to live where we live and do what we get to do. And then a lot of good can come out of that. So that's one example that I think of in Boone County. And, and then there's things like in Boone County, you've got such a strong 4-H program and FFA program. So the youth in Boone County, for me, again, just looking in my backyard, is a real strength. And the agriculture community does a great job of supporting those organizations and really coming out for those things. And you see your co-alliances and your co-ops from across the state, participating so heavily and supporting those organizations. So, those are really important. I don't think we recognize how big that is to economic development.
No, there's a lot there. We're going to put in our show notes some of the links, looking at loveincbc.org and understanding how communities came together, and then all the partner churches and everybody coming together to basically make it a better place to live and show gratitude just to be able to do the things we do. That's important. I think a lot of communities have things like this, but should look to that as a model. FFA, we have their national headquarters here in Indiana. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, really strong. And then their state team is here in our State Department of Agriculture.
Wow. So FFA, why is that important for people? So some people listening to this may not know what it is. Many will. What is it, and why organizations like that and 4-H? I'm probably not supposed to compare the two, but why are they important to economic development, but also to our industry?
Well, I think what you just said is important, because I think historically we might say something like that. We probably shouldn't compare the two, but we should absolutely put the two right in together. And there's comparisons, but the bottom line is you're training up the youth to do great things in the future. And, so most of what FFA is going to concentrate on is that training. And there's so many different things that they're trained to do. It really starts with leadership development. And some of the best and brightest young people in the state are going to go through the FFA program and learn a lot of leadership skills. And they're going to be the ones fighting for your job in the not too distant future, and my job. And so you got really good leaders that come out, but then you've also got all the technical and vocational type skills that are taught and started at the high school level. And we need so much of that. So FFA and 4-H are really important to workforce development. And when you hear that word said in the state, workforce development with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, it's really big. And yet we, again, in agriculture, we may not see ourselves as part of that picture, but we very much are. The FFA program and the 4-H programs are extremely important to workforce development.
Yeah, it's really amazing. When we look at the folks we hire, if we see FFA or 4-H, we know that the odds are much better that we've got somebody that has the capability or the training background to do the things that we're doing and be adaptable. In fact, you say that, to take my job, that's hopefully what will happen is we've got a lot of blue jackets and others here that understand agriculture, but how to lead and how to shape where this needs to go. And we can all do that in our space. So it is really great that we have those organizations and that we're investing in our youth and our future. And I think it's a good call out from you, Don Lamb, to think about how are we in our own spaces investing in the next generation so we can develop the society that we want to have. I think that's really, really good feedback for us. while we're still going here, just a couple more things around the director of ag. So hardwoods. Mm-hmm. That's something that I see corn a lot. I told you spearmint. Okay. We'll run into some duck things and hogs, like, open, not normal farming that I'm used to.
Yeah.
You mentioned hardwoods. Tell me a little bit more about Indiana and hardwoods and agriculture.
Yeah. Well, Indiana's got a great hardwood industry and a great hardwood history, both in the South and the North, and really scattered all over.
Okay.
And you might not think about it. And part of the reason is they do such a good job of not only harvesting trees, which is much like we think of harvesting any other crop, but planting trees. And so it's not like, I think everybody thinks, well, if you're harvesting a lot of trees, you're just taking out all the forests and the woods in the state. Well, it's actually going the opposite direction. We're growing more than we used to. And for every one tree that's harvested, there's 3 planted or something along those. I don't know the exact number, but it's a big industry, and they are part of the agricultural community. And that's one thing I'd say has been a goal of ours here just in the last, let's say 10 years, is to make sure that we do include hardwoods in agriculture, and hardwoods want to be a part of agriculture, and that we want to work together. I went on a tour 2 days ago, went up to Coomers in Frankfurt, saw their operation, went over to Hollingsworth Lumber at Rushville, Indiana, and saw what they do, completely different than Coomers, but just super successful both places, and went up to Cole Hardwoods in Logansport and IDI, which does more furniture parts out of the hardwood industry. And it's huge. And then the other part of that is Cole Hardwoods, for example, is a company that has modeled that giving back to their community better than many I've seen anywhere. They really have given to that Logansport community, and they're a staple there because they've done a good job of giving back. So I'm just super impressed with the hardwood industry in Indiana.
It's absolutely amazing. And you just name checked one of my neighbors, the Hollingsworth Lumber Company there in Rushville. But I was looking when you brought it up and preparing for our conversation today, even the interactive map that your websites have and where the hardwood industry is and all the jobs that we have in the state. I didn't realize how pervasive it's how it touched almost every part of Indiana. It's something like 10 billion and 70,000 jobs. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. $10.5 billion of income, and 70,000 jobs in the hardwood industry. And I mean, who'd have thought that? It's just a very well kept secret.
Well, I think for the younger folks thinking about what am I going to do for a career, and I like agriculture, and maybe I like Purdue or these other schools, I think knowing that this industry is out there and what it can do is pretty important. So, I'm learning something just having this conversation with you, Don, and preparing for this. I didn't realize how important that was to Indiana. So it's really good to see that. Are there any other technologies or things around ag that you think people should know more about while we're still having a discussion here about Indiana and agriculture today, Don?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm thinking the first thing that popped in my mind when I think about technology is that, I first think about equipment and things like that. But I think more than anything else right now, when I think about the biological world and the ag biosciences and what's coming down the pipe in that part of technology, there are so many different things that we're learning about now, and we're starting to use products that can be beneficial to our crops. And really, when you think about the whole cycle of the soil and a plant and a human health, that whole world is really spinning now, and that's probably going to be the most exciting area to look at when they think about new technology that really could have a positive impact on people.
I think that's really great. So, Don, I want to say thank you, and I think there's more that we're going to get into as we look at your farm and see what you'd like to share as we understand the insights and what's going on. I'm going to do a little bit of thinking about all the things that you have in your remit and what it means. And I've got some questions from folks already on this that I want to go through and understand. So we're going to definitely have you back on our AcreForward podcast. But before we go, I just want to see if there's anything else you wanted to share or say to our listeners before we do our outro here.
Yeah. Well, I guess I just want to encourage people in the ag community to have pride in what we do, and not be afraid to share that. And together we're a huge puzzle, and we're all just pieces of that puzzle. So we may not think of what we do as that valuable sometimes, but together it is extremely valuable. So just be encouraged, be positive, do what you can do in your communities, and be a positive influence to the young people around you.
So Indiana and Don Lamb are both known for humility, but we all know that humility is also a proper sense of your self-worth and your worth. In Indiana, and the things that are done in the agricultural community do have a lot of worth. And so if anybody takes anything from this show today is, we're very fortunate to have you in the role in Indiana there, Don, as a director. We're really looking forward to seeing the things that are coming and having future conversations. And it's how Indiana can further show its worth and build on that for the sake of everyone involved. So again, thank you for joining our discussion today.